Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Facts and Fallacies, episode 249. My name is Cameron English, your host as always, joined again by Dr. Liza Dunn, toxicologist, physician, all-around wonderful lady. How are you doing, Liza?
Fine. How are you?
It's great to see you again. I do have to make a slight complaint, though. You posted a horrifying picture on Twitter of a very poisonous snake. Venomous, excuse me, coming out of some lady's fridge in Australia. And I just looked at that and like shuddered a little bit. That was horrifying. Is that real? First of all, I guess is the question I want to know.
As far as I understand, because it was sent by Jillian Fennell, who is a big ag person in Australia. I can't remember her exact role, but this is, yes, her friend's son actually was bitten in the past by a venomous snake in Australia. And I don't know if you know this, I think you probably do, but Australia is home to the most venomous creatures on the planet. And figures, there are all sorts of ways to die at the hands of Mother Nature there. So apparently getting snakes caught in your ice machine is one of them. I wasn't 100% sure just looking at the snake what kind it was. It was darkish, but it could have been an eastern brown snake, which is really, really highly venomous.
I went and looked that up after you speculated, and apparently the venom of that snake acts like a hyper blood thinner. So it bites you and then you just bleed out. I'm like, oh man, I would have lit my fridge on fire.
So very, very scary.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, well, I don't know what to tell people. If you got a snake in your fridge, you're gonna have a bad day. Okay. Yeah. Well, anyways, let's oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that reminds me of a story. When I was a fellow in New York, a guy came to the ER, actually not my patient, this was my boss's patient, came to the ER with a rattlesnake bite, and he'd said that he'd been playing Frisbee in Central Park and reached under a bush and wound up with a rattlesnake bite. And the problem is that it was like November, and Central Park doesn't really have rattlesnakes. Oh. And it turned out that he was keeping snakes in his fridge for his little restaurant, and the fridge kind of is cooler, and so snakes slow down when it's cool, but this one was a little bit sort of more alert than he thought, and so he got bitten on the hand by a rattlesnake from his own fridge.
Well, there's a good life lesson. Don't put snakes in your fridge. They don't go.
Nope.
Okay, enough about my fear of these ridiculous creatures. Let's talk about our stories today. We've got 3 as usual, and first up, we're going to talk about lab-grown meat. 14 facts you need to know about this flashy new technology. And then next up, big weed today is a whole lot like big tobacco in the 1950s. And finally, new report urging parents to buy organic could hurt Americans' health, according to experts. All kinds of cool stuff in here, Liza. This first story, though, this is from a website called Tasting Table by Sarah Klimek. And I have to say, overall, I think it's a pretty decent story in that it just sort of summarizes how lab-grown meat is made and some of the potential risks and benefits of it and how it compares to animal agriculture. It's not perfect, but few stories are. And I think this is a good read overall if you want to understand how this works and if you should eat it, if you shouldn't eat it, and so forth. I think the biggest thing we'll probably discuss is the environmental impact of this versus, typical traditional agriculture. But what did you take away from this?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Lots of people have reasons why they want to decrease their meat consumption. Some of it is because of moral reasons, because of, animal welfare. Some of it's because of the environmental impact of livestock. And some of it is because, they think that, greenhouse gas emissions are higher and things like that with live livestock. So there are a bunch of reasons. Some of them are even religious. So, some people don't eat pork products and things like that. So there are a variety of reasons why people make the decisions that they do. And I think they're entitled to those decisions. And this particular product is designed to accommodate some of those desires. And so the idea is that if you can culture meat and grow meat, you can actually have in a petri dish. You can in a bioreactor, you can decrease the amount of livestock that you need to meet the increasing demand for meat that is expected to grow globally.
Yeah, let's get to there again. There wasn't much that I disliked about this article, but one of the things they said in sort of doing an A/B comparison between lab-grown meat and animal agriculture is they said that the environmental footprint of farming has gotten worse in recent decades, and based on all the data I'm aware of, that's
That's
not even remotely correct, right?
that's not even remotely correct.
Right.
Yes.
It's the same thing with cars or any technology. They get more sustainable over time because the technology improves. What do you think
That's
about
exactly right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we've made it so many great advances in agriculture, both crop production and livestock production, that the animals that we have out there are much more efficient, much more productive than they have been in the past. Over the past 100 years, we've gotten an unbelievable increase in milk, meat, and egg production with fewer inputs, actually. And the really important thing about animal agriculture that a lot of people forget is that it's part of sort of the natural cycle. Livestock take grass, which we can't eat, and they transform it into very, very high quality protein that we've evolved to use in our diets. And so they take land that you wouldn't otherwise be able to grow things on, and are able to convert that land into high quality food sources. The other thing that they do is they maintain soil. If you don't overgraze, they maintain soil quality because of manure, right? So you improve your soil microorganism concentrations and varieties. If you have you need manure to fertilize the soil that way. So I think that people sort of forget that when they're thinking about all the different trade-offs when it comes to livestock production. The other thing that people forget about is how the entire animal is actually used. So over 60% of the animal will be in meat. But there are multiple everyday ordinary things that we take for granted that are made out of other byproducts of livestock. So, for example, in research, we use gel and gelatin and things like that come from, hooves and other products, right? Blood is used to make imitation eggs, which is kind of interesting to think about. The sticky part of Band-Aids is made from fatty acids. So there are all sorts of adhesives and shampoos. And if you see stearic acid, those things are all derived from animal sources. So the whole animal is used in the production of things from your belt to your footballs that you play with and things like that. In terms of leather, the whole carcass is used. Gut is used for instrument strings and tennis racket strings and things like that. We sort of take all of that stuff for granted. So if you get rid of all of livestock farming, there are a whole lot of other impacts that you can have that are people don't think about.
Yes, it's the same thing with like fossil fuels, for example, and plastics. That's another good example. But just specifically to this issue, just a couple of stats that I would like more people to be aware of. So this was a report from the Breakthrough Institute, which is also cited in this article, but not this report, interestingly enough. So there's 140 million fewer hectares of pasture today than there were in 2000. And as you said, production has increased. So we're getting more meat, more milk, more derivative products from these animals, and we're raising fewer of them on less land, right? So the impact is shrinking. And part of that is, as you said, there's been improvements in animal health. There's better medicines, better vaccines in some cases. The animals are bred for the conditions where they're raised. So if the weather's hotter, for example, you can breed cattle that thrive in that environment. Like in Brazil, for example. It's all kinds of things. And then this is the one I always like to bring up, is that there's a lot of dairy and livestock operations that recycle animal or methane from animal manure and turn it into energy, and they power their farms. And any article you read that wants to attack animal agriculture, they never bring this up, and it's like, I think In California, it's only one state, but there's been a 30% reduction in methane emissions from animal agriculture because of this. So if you can replicate that in more places and scale it, that's an enormous sustainability initiative, and no one talks about it, right? It's funny.
And that is actually really important because it's once again, recycling and doing it, recycling the products that you make and becoming more and more energy efficient, right? So, energy is one of the big things we talk about and trying to capture efficiencies. So if you can capture energy out of this as well as nutritious food with a decreased environmental footprint, you are really doing something enormous for both health for people and health for the planet. And I keep on hearing people talk about this One Health concept, but they don't get to hear about these really good ideas for how to manage this stuff.
Yeah, that's because it's ideological. You're going to eat the bugs and the lab-grown meat, and you're going to like it because your overlords have told you so, not because of science.
Right. The other problem with this meat is that it's extraordinarily expensive. So I saw at the Consortium of Universities for Global Health a conference, and they're just to be clear, there are plant-based meats, right, that are made out of soy and pea and things like that, and that's different than this. These are cell cultures, so this is coming from stem cells from cattle or other animals where they where they grow it from the actual stem cells, and so at the conference, 1 pound of meat cost $18,000. And that's just not sustainable. Ordinary people have to be able to buy food. And so right now, the livestock industry is very productive, produces high quality food. We've got the best quality food that we've ever had in the history of our existence. And they do it in a way that is affordable to most people. In previous centuries, people haven't had access to lots of meat in their diet. And they were, vitamin B12 deficient and a whole variety of other things. So the way we've got it set up now, more people have access to higher quality food.
Yeah. And I've heard Dr. Alison Van Eenenum put it, we're basically trying to replicate a cow in the laboratory when we already have cows. So,
yes.
Right. So that's necessarily,
exactly right.
That's going to be an energy intensive project because you're trying to replicate something that nature already gave us. And interestingly, in this article, they cite a study from UC Davis where Dr. Van Eenenum is a resident expert, I'll say. But according to the study, the per kilogram of beef, carbon emissions are between 4 and 25 times higher. If you were to scale the technology as it exists now, that's enormous. Now, in defense of the lab-grown meat folks, that will probably improve in the future as the technology gets better, just like it does with everything we've talked about so far. But I think instead of throwing a bunch of money in this and talking about how it's going to save us from a climate catastrophe, we should let the industry grow and actually make a product that's viable and great. No problem with that. But
exactly,
there's too much hype and not enough production yet, right?
That's exactly right.
Too few results. But yeah, that's good. Check out this article if it's a topic you want to learn more about. It's just 12 or 14 facts about lab-grown meat. Good background. So check that out. And let's move on and talk about pot, which is everyone's favorite topic, Liza. So this is a story from Stat News. It's called "Big Weed Today is a Whole Lot Like Big Tobacco in the 1950s." It's by Thomas Fairley, Dr. Thomas Fairley, who was some sort of public health official in New York for a long time. So he starts out and he says, drug prohibition has not worked, right? I think most people I would recognize today that, putting people in jail for selling or using marijuana, probably not a good idea. It's just, we haven't solved this problem of drug use and abuse with courts and laws and police officers. It hasn't worked. So his solution is to treat he calls it big marijuana or big weed, excuse me, right? We need to treat big weed the way we treated big tobacco after the 1960s. So the idea is that it's a public health approach. So you tax the product, you regulate the product, you restrict how it's advertised, specific claims. So you'll see today, like dispensaries will say marijuana prevents diabetes and it's good for pain and it's, makes you too much.
Blah.
Right. So there's a lot of, and And again, part of the problem is the academy, because there's a lot of goofy epidemiological research where they say people that smoke pot have this particular trait that is positive on some occasions, and therefore, right, marijuana.
We're going to take that and we're going to overstate its promise.
There you go. Gobble your THC gummies. It's good for your blood sugar or whatever. Anyways, but he goes through and he talks about it, like each paragraph he says, the tobacco industry's made this bunk claim about cigarettes, and then now big weed is making this bunk claim about their multitude of products, and then big tobacco lied about this health effect, and now marijuana, big weed is right. That's the model throughout the story, and the basic idea, again, as he says, we cut cigarette smoking like by 75%. And I think today it's the lowest it's ever been. Like youth smoking is like below 2%. So it's very good for public health. I think we can dispute why that has happened. He wants to take credit. He and his fellow health bureaucrats want to say, look at all this great work we did. But nevertheless, he says we should be done with prohibition. Let's move into a public health approach. So you're the toxicologist and the doctor. You've seen more of this in real life than I think most people have. What do you think?
So I think that it's kind of interesting to have watched the whole harm reduction movement develop in the setting of trying to decriminalize all sorts of different kinds of drugs that have formerly been criminalized. Now, while I don't think people should be in prison for having a little bit of marijuana on them, there was, unlike with tobacco, a very robust black market created for THC and THC derivatives and things like that. So what you've got here is you've got the desire to regulate THC in a way that will prevent them from making claims like the tobacco industry did, and prevent them from inviting children into, with eating, THC gummies. The same thing was said about Joe Camel. I don't know if you remember Joe Camel was a character on a cigarette pack. And basically it was thought that he was, appealing to kids. And that kind of advertising was trying to get kids to smoke and entice kids to smoke. And you see these advertisements. So there's very strict regulations around advertising for cigarettes and alcohol, but you're not seeing that same thing applied to cannabis, and you're not seeing the same health claims applied to cannabis as there are for this. But the problem is, if you regulate and tax, and we're already seeing this, if you regulate and tax and make it very, very difficult for people to produce cannabis in a legal way, there's already a robust way to get it through the black market. And so people are actually having a hard time paying for jumping through all the hoops to open their shop while people can still get it on the street. And because the breeding methods are better and higher, you're getting higher and higher concentrations of THC, and there are attendant problems with that. But you're still getting much more potent THC, and you can get from the street. You're also seeing, though, people adulterating street bought THC, and you can find blood thinners in there. You can find, fentanyl in there. There have been a lot of deaths and things like that. So this is going to be, long and short for my answer, this is going to be a lot more complex to regulate than tobacco was.
Yes, and I don't know Dr. Fairley. I'm sure he's a swell guy, but this public health approach is not nearly as helpful as he lets on in the story. And what's going to happen? I'll bet money on this if someone wants to bet me. If he gets his way and they regulate marijuana the way they have tobacco over the years, you're going to get 4 or 5 giant pharmaceutical companies or giant consumer product companies that are going to dominate the market. They're going to crowd everyone else out of the market. They're going to lobby for regulations that are almost impossible to comply with. And then you're gonna have, like you have legacy tobacco now, you're gonna have a legacy marijuana industry. And as you said, people that don't want to go to, I don't know, GlaxoSmithKline for their pot, they're gonna go to Steve around the corner, and they're gonna get
and buy their pot from him tax free.
Right. They're gonna get their whatever, magic carpet ride on. It's like it doesn't work. The other thing, and this really frustrates me, because these people with this mindset, they take it upon themselves to say, I'm going to teach you what's good for you. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to force you to do what I want because I care about you, and I'm smart, and I live in a New York high-rise apartment. Like it burns my blood. It makes me really angry. But here's the thing. If you really want to prevent drug use in people, there's robust research that shows you how to do it. And it's common sense too. So, for example, and again, I'm looking at a study in JAMA Internal Medicine. This is based on the Nurses' Health Study. They said people who are religious are less likely to be addicted to drugs. And if they find religion later in life, they're more likely to recover from addiction. If you live in a two-parent home as a child, over and over and over again, you see really well done studies that show when there's two parents in the child's life, they don't get involved with drug use.
Mhm.
Um, and again, this one will probably get me in trouble. I don't care. Promiscuity. There's been really good research on this too. The more sexual partners you have, whether you're a man or a woman, the more inclined you are to drug use and other risky behaviors, right? But, Stat News being a Bloomberg-funded content site, they are not going to come out and say, listen, we really need parents to stay together and take their kids to church and discourage sexual activity in your teen years, right? That is just over the line. You're not allowed to comment on those things. So we're going to talk about taxing pot and, flavors hook kids and blah, 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 blah. Like all this stuff we know generally doesn't work. And just one final thing I'll say, the reason that smoking declined in, say, the 80s and 90s is because the evidence came out that it caused cancer. It just
Right.
became unequivocal. The tobacco industry tried to hold out and they were wrong. But once that revelation was clear to people, that's what caused smoking to decline. Taxes have an effect, restrictions on advertising have an effect, sure. But once people were aware, oh, this is really bad for me, I should stop.
That's exactly right. And what's amazing about that is that was the golden age of epidemiology, because you could really show a consistent effect through large cohort prospective studies, with mechanistic evidence that this was true. That was a golden age of epidemiology. And what's amazing to me is that physicians will use epidemiology in ways that are there's no evidence whatsoever that certain things cause cancer or certain things, and they will say that they will abuse epidemiology to make an ideologic point, but they will, they're not doing the same thing with this particular case. And drugs just in general. I guess what I'm saying is the harm reduction movement over the past 20 years has created an epidemic of illegal drug use that's gotten absolutely out of hand. And it's been largely driven by physicians who've been well-intended and wanted to reduce people from getting HIV from sharing needles, or hepatitis C, or other things like that. And so they've started decriminalizing hard drugs, and now you've got this population that's out on the street and absolutely not going into rehab or to addiction medicine clinics and things like that, because you're not allowed to use your drugs there. So it's had a sort of paradoxical worsening effect. And the more drugs that we legalize and the more drugs that we let people use all the time, the more I think we're causing this, and you're seeing more bad health effects. And we've started by doing that with they decriminalized heroin in Portland, and now they're like, uh-oh, maybe that was a bad idea 2 years later. But real pain patients can't get drugs, right? They can't get their medication because everything's so regulated around the medical system, but nothing's regulated around the black market and all this stuff. Yeah. So I think the same thing's happening with marijuana. I think marijuana should be very, very careful about what it's promising, because they're going to see big trial attorneys pretty darn soon, because they also, smoking marijuana probably also causes lung cancer, right? So
that's interesting.
Right? You got inflammatory, you're inhaling carcinogens.
Yeah, so it makes sense that that's a possibility. Is there a lot of data on that? I haven't looked at it very carefully. I haven't looked at it very carefully, but it makes absolute sense, right? Yeah.
So I think that I think that trial attorneys are just kicking back and looking at big weed and going, let's see what happens.
Right. Right.
So I think that I don't think that all of this kind of approach to the different classes of drugs. And that's why I'm also concerned a little bit about the whole hype around, LSD and psilocybin and as a, treating depression.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid of the black market that's already there, winding up, sort of circumventing legal use that gets taxed and regulated. And so the people who are supposedly going to benefit from it, pain patients, these things and the other, are not going to get this, and everybody else, or they're going to have to pay higher prices and go to GlaxoSmithKline or whatever drug company is making whatever product. We don't make cannabis, by the way, but whatever company is making what kind of product, they're going to pay a higher price. They're going to, it's not going to necessarily benefit them, and there's going to be just this parallel mass casualty.
This is the cynical side of me working in this area for so long, but the pharma industry, they're going to let the little guys take the lumps. They're going to let them innovate. And then once they see that there's a robust market and they know what the FDA and I don't know, probably the DEA too, once they know what the regulatory landscape is going to look like, then they're going to come in, they're going to buy up the most popular products, and everyone else is going to be excluded from the market. That's just the way it works. It's just economics. Just go look into it. I'm sorry. It's unfortunate. And again, the cynical side of me says that this is job security for the public health people. Like there's like in public health, there's the harm reduction folks, and I have my own criticisms of that. But then you have the prohibitionist wing.
Right.
They take it upon themselves to dictate everything you do, from eating bugs to smoking to how much alcohol you drink. It's the way they think. And of course, it's very convenient that right now it's big weed, right? We've run out of tobacco companies to sue. We've run out of fast food companies to sue. There's only so many pesticide manufacturers. This is one of the next big targets, right? It's big weed now. Ooh, big. It's just, so in other words, part of me says or suspects, no, I know this is true. I'm sorry. But they know that this will sustain the industry, right? So there will be a big regulated industry that can fight lawsuits, and then these people will have jobs, and then Stat News can publish articles to the end of time about how marijuana is killing your kids, and it's just
it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's just a joke. That's a joke. That's just for entertainment. What I just said, I don't believe that at all. This is only for entertainment. Okay. There you go. Stat News. Check out that article. You probably can't because it's behind a $400 paywall. So there you go, right? Right. There you go.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yay, science literacy. Okay. Okay. Final story for today. This is from The Messenger. It's by a reporter named Rena Raphael. I'm quoted in the story, by the way, just for disclosure's sake. It's just not going to change what I say, obviously, but just a heads up on that. This is an article. It's called "New Report Urging Parents to Buy Organic Could Hurt Americans' Health," according to experts. And sadly, Liza, this is about an organization I think both of us want to hold in high esteem, and that's the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Yeah.
When my son was born a couple of years ago, I had some questions about SIDS and infant nutrition and so forth. They were the first place I went, was the AAP, because I generally trusted their advice. But in recent years, they've come out and become increasingly hostile to agriculture. In 2012, they put out a report, demanding that regulators to do more to protect people from pesticides, and it was a bad report. It was based on junk research. And they came out just earlier this month, and they put out a report on crop biotechnology. And they said GMOs and associated pesticides are a potentially serious threat to public health. They made a ton of specific claims we can get into, but Raphael's story just goes through. She talks to Andrea Love, who's a physician. She hosts the Unbiased Science podcast. They did a great episode with Dr. Kevin Folta, our old friend, alumni here at the podcast. And she just goes through and she very summarily debunks some of the things in here. So the report encourages parents to buy organic if they can. I want to talk more about that in a minute. If you can, buy organic. Right. There's no research that says organic is better for you or that it's safer. There's just no evidence for that. Same thing with pesticides, right? They cherry pick studies. They cite the IARC monograph uncritically. No mention of all of the scandal there and all the scientific problems that we can talk about. But yeah, I just have to say overall, I'm just so disappointed with this, Liza, because
Yeah, it is really disappointing because this is a good organization. There are lots of people who are members of the American Academy of Pediatrics that have very common sense views about vaccination. They're huge proponents of vaccination and children's health generally. And so I'm disappointed to see this group, this particular section of that organization marketing or making these science-free claims. They're science-free. That's the problem. And so it's difficult and the biggest problem with this kind of messaging is that it's bigger than a company. It's bigger than a belief system. It really puts food security, global food security, at risk. It terrifies parents. They put pressure to ban different pesticides. And it's really unfortunate because pesticides are not only critical for public health in terms of preventing infectious diseases that have no treatment that are insect-borne and things like that, but they're also really, really critical for food security. And if you can look at Sri Lanka, that is the cost. And there is a huge uptick in severe childhood malnutrition because of science-free health claims about modern agriculture. So I'm very, very disappointed with this, and I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah, what was most striking to me, and there's an article on acsh.org that I just wrote, by the way. So read Raphael's story and then go read mine because I went a little dorkier or nerdier into some of the details, which reporters generally shouldn't do because it's just, anyways. But they made some claims in here. So as I said, most of the report is not about crop biotechnology. They say twice in there, citing the National Academies of Science, that, transferring genes between species, there's generally very low risk associated with that. As we know, right? We eat these products all the time. No one gets so much as a stomachache. But then they pivot to pesticides almost immediately. That was what was really frustrating to me. So it's like, it's the same. And this is what stuck out to me. This is the activist tactic right? It's sort of a backdoor way into attacking modern agriculture. So one of the things, and again, this is the kind of parent-focused stuff that really drives me nuts. So they cite IARC and they say IARC found that glyphosate is a probable carcinogen. What they don't say is that was based on incomplete animal data, and the exposure only applies to people in agriculture because most of the human data they had was from agricultural studies, right? And IARC even says in the report, they said we don't have any evidence on pediatric cancers. So maybe lead with that. That's just a suggestion, right? I don't work for AAP. I'm not a pediatrician, but just right as someone who's raising 2 kids, I'd like to know that, like if you're going to say pesticides are harmful, but there's no scientifically plausible way that a trace amount of weed killer on corn or whatever is going to harm your child. Put that in the press release, please. And that was not even mentioned in the report.
And those trace amounts, parts per trillion, are regulated. And and your exposure to those will not cause harm.
Right. Just a few other things. And again, about IARC. Sorry, I'm getting mad. I'm getting fired up. Okay. So again, the AAP report, they cite IARC. They cite a handful of studies that seem to vindicate IARC's monograph, but they don't mention that there's been 17 other regulatory and public health agencies around the world that have looked at more research. They've done more robust reviews of glyphosate. They all disagree with IARC. Again, if I'm a parent, I have very limited bandwidth to research food safety. If you say, hey, there's 17 organizations, giant bureaucracies with really talented scientists on staff, all of them think that IARC is wrong.
Yes, and they've also most recently had Hungary, the Netherlands, Sweden, and France independently look at all of the data, including the data that the IR looked at, write up an 11,000-page report that shows that glyphosate is not a carcinogen and that there is not a risk to human health with these tiny exposures. And if that is not enough, I in terms of science, I don't know what to say, because what will help people understand that this is so important for food security. And it's not just glyphosate, it's other herbicides. They prevent you from being exposed to toxic weeds. They prevent you from having more expensive food. You get good quality food and vegetables and fruits, which we want people eating. And they're afraid to eat it because they're afraid that it's going to cause harm. The other thing that they mentioned in this article was that, BT, which is what the protein that is used as an insecticide, it's approved for organic use.
Yeah, for 50 years. For 50 years, it's been in organic agriculture.
And genetically modified crops use the gene that makes that protein, so you can decrease the amount of insecticide use that you have. And so they make mistaken statements about BT bioaccumulating and causing other problems, and it's approved for organic farming.
Right.
We are just about out of Zoom time.
Yeah, it's okay. We can, if we need to start a new one, we can, but we can wrap it up really quick here if you want. A couple other things to add. This bugs me to no end. You're right about the BT, right? There's been a bunch of research on BT crops, on the BT proteins themselves, the crystals, whatever. There's no there, as I've been saying lately. What drives me nuts is when you get to the end of the report, there's the recommendation section, and there's like 9 or 10 of them, I want to say, but here's 2 of them. They say families who wish to minimize GMO products can do so by going to unprocessed, natural, magical, holy food that just shows up in nature. That's the good stuff, right? Eat that, not the stuff in the stores. That no one has to make that. The earth just produces it because
it's going to grow in your backyard magically.
That's right. Yeah. So there's that. But then they say schools and hospitals dedicated to the care of children can consider avoiding serving GMO foods. So here's the thing. You've just spent, 10,000 words or whatever, maligning these products, talking about toxic herbicides in the foods that people have access to. And then you get to the end, you go like, don't eat it if you don't want to. And you can afford a 20% higher grocery bill. It's like, that is infuriating. That is just
coming from people who are very food secure.
Right. And I mean, I've been fortunate, I'm not a billionaire or anything, but like when I go to the grocery store, I can afford food for my kids. And that's such a blessing that a lot of us enjoy. But the organic stuff in the kids section, there's like pouches of veggies, and it's great because kids will eat vegetables because they made it taste good, but they're all certified organic. So they're an extra $2.20.
Yep.
It is ridiculous. Now, if you're the AAP, and they had mentioned this, right? They say, there's a lot of families that for economic reasons can't afford this stuff. So, pediatricians should have conversations with their patients. Like, what's the pediatrician going to say? Like, get more money? It doesn't. Yeah.
Yes, you've just scared a whole bunch of people, and they don't have a solution to this problem. That's unnecessarily scared, right?
Okay, so there's one final problem I had with this AAP report, Liza. Well, I guess I have lots, but we're not going to talk about all of them. One of the problems is that, and again, this is going to be controversial. We'll get through this together, everyone, I promise. So the AAP has come out very, very strongly in support of gender-affirming care for transgender children. Now, whatever you think of that, and I've not been shy about my opinion, there is not good long-term evidence on the effects of giving healthy preteens or teenagers puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, or for that matter, surgical procedures. We don't have good data on that because before 2013 or 14, this was not a prominent public health issue. We weren't having this discussion. And so outside of a few, niche fields, nobody was doing research on this. Nevertheless, the AAP has come out on multiple occasions and they said, we affirm care for these children. and we're finally doing a systematic review of the evidence. But we already know, in essence, what the conclusion is going to be, right? So what that signals to parents like me and parents all over the country is that this is an ideological organization. And they've done the same thing with climate change and with gun control and with a whole host of issues. Agriculture is now another one where they've come out and they've said, we are staking our turf, our position right here. It's obviously a partisan position that we're taking, but we're the children's health people, right? That signals to everyone that you're not making decisions based on evidence. So that's a problem. And they've been very good over the years on saying, here's how you talk to parents about vaccine hesitancy. Here's how you build trust. Individual pediatricians, here's how you talk to parents. Here's how you teach them to teach their kids about health and so forth. They've been great on that. But then they come out with stuff like this, and then they go, gee whiz, it's just there's a trust crisis in medicine. No one trusts us anymore. What the heck's going on here? Let's develop this really comprehensive model for rebuilding trust. And it's like, you need to reflect just briefly on what you're doing. And maybe it's that you're saying give kids very powerful drugs at a young age when you don't know what it's going to do to them over the long term. I promise you, there are parents that see that and they go, these people are insane. I'm not going to trust anything they say. Anyways, your thoughts, Liza?
I think it's a real problem when things get politicized. And I'd like to point out that there are a lot of members of this organization that are good scientists that really, really want to bring, public health and have best health outcomes for kids. But if they're making claims that are, really contradictory, that makes it difficult for people to suss out what's the truth, right? So if you're saying homeopathic doses are of substance one is a endocrine disruptor, and we can't have homeopathic doses of this on one side, and then flip it and say something else on the other side about real endocrine issues, it's problematic from a strictly scientific point of view. That's a very difficult bridge to sort of straddle, I guess. I don't know if that's even a term, but it's very.
Yeah, I get it. It makes perfect sense. And here's the basic thing, right? You can't on one hand say, exposure to these chemicals are bad because it's politically acceptable to say that. But exposure to these actually potentially very harmful chemicals are totally fine because that's politically acceptable. You have to think through that. You have to at least be consistent,
right? The truth is the truth, right? And that's what I think is so important about this podcast and other discussions. Stay with the truth and you won't go wrong. A lot of people might not like you. You might get canceled. You might get shut down. But as long as you adhere to the truth, and sometimes this is the thing that's frustrating about the whole COVID thing, was we were learning about it in real time. And so people made mistakes, and some of those mistakes really impacted people. And so as the truth evolves, you should stay, you should, and if it turns out that the evidence should change your opinion, you should have an open enough mind to try to do that. And that's why it's so important to have open scientific debates, right? And open scientific discussion, so that people can see science is something that we learn, right? And, and we grow from. And so as long as you are sticking as close to the truth as you possibly can, I think you will be on the right track.
Yeah. And let me say something nice in closing, because I've been pretty brutal towards the AAP, but last year, I think it was, they came out with a report about childhood obesity, and it was quite good. They got criticism in the media, and they got, there was some, Academy of Children's Mental Health or something like that. They attacked them for fat shaming people, but AAP came out, and some of the language was kind of silly because they're like, make sure the furniture in your office is big enough, and make sure the art is, acceptable and it makes people feel welcoming. Or it's like, that's a little dumb, but they came out and they said, look, childhood obesity is a very big problem and we need to address it. So good on them for having the willing. So again, here's another example, right? they are able to follow the science on certain issues.
Yes.
Do it on all issues. That's it.
Yes.
That's
Just
it.
do it on all issues. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it there. Go read the report and read the criticism of it, because it's coming from very reputable people. Not just me ranting on my podcast, but like PhDs, agricultural scientists, toxicologists, so it's good to read all sides and then settle with the facts. But we're done for now. See you next week. Follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. It's at Dr. Liza MD, at CamJ English. Genetic Literacy Project is at geneticliteracy.org. We don't speak for them, of course, but they give us this platform. They let us say whatever we want, which we really appreciate. So with that, have a great week. See you next time.
Bye-bye.